Well, let's pick up with this next session. We're continuing on with unemployment. And the next topic under unemployment is something called Okun's Rule of Thumb. This will be very brief. It doesn't take a lot of explanation, but I just want to talk through it and make sure you're aware of what it means and how it's used. Okun's Rule of Thumb. Now, this rule of thumb is simply an observational correlation. It's not necessarily a cause and effect relationship. It's just an observable correlation. So with Okun's Rule of Thumb, you've got unemployment here, and you've got output GDP here. And Okun's Rule of Thumb says there's a 1-to-2 relationship between this guy and that guy. Now, I'm not saying it's causal. I'm just saying you can, if this happens, then you can expect to see that over there. It's not that one causes the other. It's just that they tend to work in sync together in a 2-to-1 relationship. And at the most basic level, we can say, well, if we could decrease unemployment by 1%, then we should expect GDP and output to go up by 2%. So it's a 1-to-2 relationship, but it is an inverse relationship between unemployment and GDP. Okun's Rule of Thumb says, okay, if we can lower unemployment by 1%, we should expect to see our GDP, our output, to go up by 2%. Okay, let's just try a test question here. Let's say we want to increase GDP by 10%. What are we going to have to do to unemployment to see that happen? If it's a 1-to-2 relationship. We want this to go up by 10%. Then, class, what's going to have to happen to unemployment? Go up or down? Down. And down by how much? I hear it. You're saying it, but just not very loudly. Oh, you're going to give me hand signals. Oh, it's this much. Okay, that's fine. That's right. Okay, that'll work. See how that works? It's very simple. It's not complicated. It's simply an observational phenomenon. It's not really, I can't say there's any causal links here, although it might look that way. We're just saying we tend to see that relationship between unemployment and GDP. So if you see a test question with those two things, you know that it is an inverse relationship. This one's going down, this one's going up, this one's going up, this one's going down. Okay, it's inverse, and it's 1-to-2. Okay, now let's go to a bigger topic, a longer topic, and that's called inflation. Inflation. In microeconomics, if we choose to raise the price of our product or decrease the price of our product, that has nothing to do really about the big picture of things. Whether we lay off some people on our assembly line or add more people to our assembly line, that all has to do with how we're running our firm at a microeconomic level. But if all prices tend to go up or all prices tend to go down, or lots more people get employed across the nation or a lot more people get unemployed across, now we're talking about a macroeconomic phenomenon. And inflation, when we're talking about prices as a whole, we're talking about a macroeconomic phenomenon. So let me just give you a definition here, because I want to point out that there are actually two kinds of inflation. And when you hear the word inflation on the news, or you read it in the Wall Street Journal, or an opinion section of the New York Times or something, they're talking about inflation that is this kind. If there's nothing in front of the word inflation, what they're talking about is price inflation. If they just use the word inflation, they're talking about price inflation. Now, what do we mean by it? How do we define price inflation? Price inflation is a general rise in all prices. Price inflation is a general rise of all prices. Now, since we're there, now that you know that price inflation is a general rise in all prices, what do you suspect the word or the phrase price deflation might mean? A general decrease in all prices. Price inflation is a general increase in all prices. Price deflation is a general fall in all prices. Now, I just want to touch on this right now, but you should probably just have in the back of your mind that because all prices tended to fall during the Great Depression, prices of everything fell during the Great Depression, that falling prices and depression tend to go together. And so most economists fear falling prices because they fear what historically accompanied falling prices, and that's a very depressed, recessed economy. Now, there's another kind of inflation, and there's a different definition for this other kind of inflation, and it's called monetary inflation. First kind of inflation, price inflation, a general rise in all prices. Second kind of inflation, monetary inflation, which has a different definition. The definition of monetary inflation is an increase in the money supply. The definition of monetary inflation is an increase in the money supply. Now that you're done writing, what do you think monetary deflation means? Let's see. Monetary inflation means an increase in the money supply, so monetary deflation would mean a decrease in the money supply. Very good. It would be a decrease in the money supply. And again, if somebody out of the blue says something about inflation, which kind are they talking about? This one. So keep that in mind, even though you need to know that there's two kinds. There are two kinds, and they're got two separate definitions, and it's really difficult when you use the same word and you got two definitions for the same word, and we're not precise with our language, because sometimes people will refer to this sometimes, but you got to know the context to know exactly what they're talking about, because they're two different things. They're related. They are definitely related, but they are two different things. Now, let me give an illustration here. And unfortunately, you can tell the age of your professor by the illustrations that he uses, and so I'm going to confess that I'm an old geezer here and just lay it all out for you, because anyway. When I was old enough to get my license to drive, my older brother had just graduated from college, and he got a job teaching chemistry and physics, and he wanted to buy his first new car because he had this job nailed down, signed a contract, so he could borrow money to buy this car. And I had probably spent way too much time in study hall reading Motor Trend magazine and looking at all the muscle cars in the era. And he asked me what would be a nice car to get. And so it was in the year, I think, 1964, 1965, I'm trying to remember. I think it was 1965, yeah. Oh yeah, I was just getting my license, that's right. In 1965, I said, well, you need to go to this town down here, down Loudonville there, and what you need, what I think you really ought to get is a 1965, at that point in time they were called a GOAT. That's what the car was called. It was a Pontiac Le Mans that some mid-level executives, one of them was named DeLorean, decided that they would beef up the suspension and beef up the horsepower and turn it into a fun mobile and two-door and stuff. And so I said, you got to get one of these 1965 GTOs, and you got to be a 4-speed Positrax, and we can modify the suspension a little bit and put deep dish chrome reverse wheels on it, make it midnight blue, and my brother just thought that was great. And so he got it. Can anybody guess what it cost? I know what it cost because I was there, and I was wheeling and dealing, and yeah, I did. A year later, I did get to drive it around. But anybody guess what it cost? Another part of this story happened to be up at Severance Hall or something like that. This circle up there, they got a Western Reserve Museum. They got a P-50 Flying Tiger aircraft in there, and they got all sorts of museum stuff in there. And I went downstairs to look at more museum type stuff, and guess what they had sitting downstairs in a museum? Here I am, 60 years, and they got to think in a museum. I talk about showing your age. I mean, that's pretty good. Okay, now later on, not that many years ago, I think it was about here, I happened to be sitting in an auto dealer's, getting a car work done, and I picked up a Motor Trend or something. I just happened to notice that they made this thing. I don't know if that was the last year or not that they actually made one of those things. But I remember this one. I remember this one very, very well. Whether you had it on a road course or a quarter mile on a Sunday afternoon, you could burn off a set of tires, and that was a heck of a lot of fun because tires didn't cost that much. And you could use up a lot of gasoline because it was only like 25 cents a gallon. And so it was just a lot of grins and giggles. It was just really fun. It was really fun. And I was thinking as I was sitting in this dealership, 2005, they were making a GTO, and they were trying to carry on a little bit of muscle car. They're trying to tone that down because they don't want people to get into big muscle cars anymore. They want them to be, anyway, different. And I was wondering, I bet this thing right off the showroom floor was just a lot of fun. I wonder if it was on a drag strip or road course, if this thing would be as much funs and giggles as I remember that thing did. I didn't know, but just in round numbers, guess what it cost to buy one of these things in 2005 compared to 1965? Nice round numbers. Probably on the low side, I know, but okay, that's a 30,000. Okay. Now, if my brother had decided, I don't know if I really want to spend that much money to get that thing, I think I'll take $3,000 and put it in a jar, seal it, and bury it. And how many years is this? From here to here? Do the math. About 40? Is that right? About 40 years? And he waits 40 years. After 40 years, he gets out his treasure trove and he goes into the dealership to buy his brand new GTO. And how much GTO can he get? Sorry, son. We don't sell any for that kind of money. Yeah, we could give you pictures and maybe pieces, parts, but that's it. Right? Huh. Now, wait a minute. He could have bought the whole thing for $3,000 here if, this might be a stretch because this one only had AM radio, no air conditioning, just AM radio. That's it. That's all. That's the only option you get, AM radio, that or nothing. This one had, I don't know, tape deck and all that sort of stuff. This one had a lot more electronics on it, and this didn't have any electronics. There's no electronics, like spark plug. That'd be about the amount of electronics. I'm wondering if I should condense this or if I should expand it. And so let me just try to expand it and come back. Let me just digress. I want to continue this, but just to make this story a little bit wider. Have you ever, or do you ever remember coming home, maybe after school, high school or something, and you hear your mom and dad you overhear them talking about something, and your dad says, I don't know, Millie. I'm getting a raise every year. I'm working harder than I ever worked, but it seems every year I'm working harder and harder, and I'm getting further and further behind. It's taking, I'm getting raises, I'm making more and more money, but it seems like my standard of living keeps slipping away, even though I'm making more. I just don't understand it. I just don't understand it. One of the reasons he doesn't understand it, and we're going to finish this example in a minute, one of the reasons he doesn't understand it is because John Maynard Keynes is famous for another phrase. And he said, the inflationary tax, he called it inflationary tax, is a tax that only one person in 1,000 can ever figure out how they've been taxed. The inflation tax, boom, the price of basically the same thing keeps going up. And it takes more and more of these paper dollars to get the same thing in the future. Is a way that people can be taxed that not one person in 1,000 can figure out how they've been taxed. So we're going to talk more about this inflation tax with my GTO example when we come back in the next session.